VikesNow, I am Dustin Baker. What are we at? We are about May 14th, 3 weeks from mandatory minicamp. Business will kind of heat up then. I guess training camp is really when it'll be hot and heavy. So we're going to spend the next 3 weeks to couple months sifting through this roster, going through all the storylines. That's what May, especially this portion of May, are for. I'm here on a solo trip today. So what I want to chat is kind of a look back at the offseason moves. We've covered the big stuff, the most momentous stuff. We talked about the draft ad nauseum, got every single human being in the Vikings orbit prediction. Most of them got it right, picking J.J. McCarthy, except for this guy who thought they would get Drake May to no avail. We still love J.J. McCarthy, a fantastic pick, excited for his trajectory. He had a wonderful little rookie minicamp. He did all the right things and said all the right stuff. So I'll continue to say it. The only thing that really matters about Vikings football henceforth is whether or not McCarthy pans out as the real deal. But let's start our look back at the most underrated offseason moves for these Vikings. Per the usual format, I start at number 5, and then as we work our way up to number 1, we'll get to the one I consider the most underrated. So at number 5 here, this is at the bottom of the food chain, still important nevertheless. At number 5, I have the Vikings' continued undrafted free agent majesty to start off this list. And what do I mean by that? Well, for the third straight year, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, basically since he took over the team, has signed the keynote undrafted free agent. He has some kind of hack that mandates right after the draft is over, we're getting the best guy on the open market, hell or high water. In 2022, it was Luigi Villain, who I believe is now on the Panthers roster. He didn't bust out like Ivan Pace last year. Speaking of Ivan Pace, in 2023, that UDFA class was headlined by Mr. Pace Jr. The Vikings got him. This year, a guy with a really similar story, I guess. Gabriel Murphy, an edge rusher from UCLA, slid out of the draft. He was supposed to probably be a 4th rounder, 5th rounder. No cigar. The knock on him, this will sound really familiar, is, not quite strong enough or long enough to be an effective edge rusher. Well, the Vikings don't care. Ivan Pace worked last year, so why not try Gabriel Murphy? They also got the Dwight McLaughlin, the cornerback. So it is this now established custom, this process of your favorite team somehow having the hack to get the best undrafted guys like clockwork. Now, I think it's because 2 reasons. I think the Vikings fling generous cash in the direction of the best UDFAs. Money talks. And so you're able to get Ivan Pace, or this year get Gabriel Murphy. I think that is probably at the very front of the line for how does this keep happening. But in addition, when a team is leading up to the draft, they're granted these top 30 visits for Vikings or any other team to meet with prospects. I think the Vikings spend a lot of those on players that aren't necessarily first rounders or second rounders. They extend the invitation to guys like Gabriel Murphy or Dwight McLaughlin, or Ty James was another one. He's a wide receiver that's now on the 90-man roster. And they spend the time with a guy who isn't heavily coveted around the league, so that when that person goes undrafted, they can pick up the phone and say, you know what, homie, we just met with you 3 weeks ago. We told you we were interested in you. You didn't get drafted. Here's our $200,000 or whatever it is, guaranteed cash. Come play with us. And the guy's like, sure. So on the whole, it's becoming a tradition of Vikings football, so long as Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is in charge, that it's not only draft weekend, it's Saturday night, the draft after party, which is at least one really sweet UDFA, probably a couple. That flies under the radar, especially because we saw it parlayed into Ivan Pace last year. So it happened again, chiefly with Gabriel Murphy and a side dish of Dwight McLaughlin. The Vikings, again, won undrafted free agency. That is number 5. Number 4 is the free agent addition after the first wave of Shaquille Griffin. He is a cornerback that is now in the mix. There's about 11 cornerbacks on the Vikings roster. And of course, Shaquille Griffin isn't a lockdown, Pro Bowler. But what he does is make it so that the cornerback room or Brian Flores' options formulating this 53-man roster, it makes it flexible. If there was no Shaq Griffin on this roster, we'd probably be chatting like we do about WR3 right now in left guard. Like they should go sign Stephon Gilmore. They should go sign Xavier Howard. They could probably still do that if they were really in the mood, but Shaq Griffin makes it so we don't have to have those damn conversations in the middle of May. You'll recall at the last year when free agency began, everybody wanted Duke Shelley back. Cameron Dantzler got cut. We'd look at the cornerback roster and be like, there's not any guys on here. This is before Byron Murphy came to the team. Now we have the opposite problem. Although they don't have any absolutely all-pro cornerbacks, they have about 6 or 7 that can make the 53-man roster, which, of course, will make for some uncomfortable roster cuts in about, 3 months? A little bit over 3 months. But Shaq Griffin provides veteran experience and a stability and an element of flexibility because you never know. Is Mekhi Blackman, he looked great last year. Could he have a sophomore slump? Of course he could. He probably won't, but of course he could. Andrew Booth, we never know if he's going to take the jump and stay healthy and boom, become a starter. Caleb Evans could be on the chopping block. He was benched a couple times last year. So you have all these guys that have a little bit of a checkered history, at least with the Vikings. And when you bring in Shaquille Griffin for, a relatively affordable deal, he's somebody that can be sturdy. You wouldn't have, what you got in Shaquille Griffin where you have a bunch of other question marks. So at number 4, I like that we don't have to bitch about cornerback depth at this juncture of the offseason. I know I'm in agreement with you that it's not like this absolute gangbusters group of cornerbacks. But out of that group of 6 or 7, you should be able to find, through a camp battle, the 2 or 3 best options to take most of the defensive snaps in Brian Flores' defense. And I think the addition of Shaquille Griffin makes it so, hey, if one of these youngsters doesn't quite look that great this summer, well, at least we got Shaquille Griffin. He can play in a pinch. And he might even end up, getting the other starter's job next to Byron Murphy. So it's added veteran depth in a room that needs to improve because last year the Vikings ranked 32nd, dead last in completion percentage allowed to opposing quarterbacks. On the whole, the defense markedly improved from Ed Donatel to Brian Flores, but you could see it plain as day against the Chargers in Week 3, you might recall. The Vikings had a hard time, preventing the other team from completing passes. And I think anytime that you use your offseason to get more cornerbacks, that cannot be a bad thing. And that's exactly what Shaquille Griffin is at number 4. Number 3, you could move this one up to the top of the list if you wanted to. I tweeted this. It was an epiphany that I had, was it last Thursday or Friday, that for the first time since 2015, heading into 2016, so about a decade ago, for the first time, the Vikings have full coaching staff continuity. Same head coach, same offensive coordinator, same defensive coordinator. Now, we are so accustomed to an offensive coordinator getting promoted during the Zimmer era or in Andrew DiFilippo's case, getting fired, that it just became absolutely part of the culture that, hey, if you like a coordinator, that dude isn't sticking around for very long. Kevin Stefanski got a promotion in 2019 to 2020 to the Cleveland Browns. So if it felt like maybe the coaching carousel for the Vikings was really quiet in January and a little bit of February, that's because there wasn't movement at the top of the ticket. Kevin O'Connell, of course, job is secure. And then after that, Wes Phillips is like his lieutenant, his George Edwards from the Zimmer era that you probably not going to go anywhere because Kevin O'Connell is the play caller. And then the big question mark was Brian Flores, who evidently didn't get any coaching sniffs for returning to a head coaching position. Therefore, because O'Connell is going into year 3, Wes Phillips ain't going anywhere, and Brian Flores couldn't get a head coaching interview, you have full continuity at the top of the ticket for the Vikings coaching staff for the first time in about a decade. I believe in 2015 into 2016, the offensive coordinator was Norv Turner, and he eventually paved the way for Pat Shurmur to take over. But usually we have at least one new coach on one side of the ball, and because it's an offense-first enterprise now with Kevin O'Connell, We don't have the defensive revolving door as we should come to expect. This time next year, we're probably talking about a new defensive coordinator because Brian Flores, boom, got hired by the blah, blah, blahs. Now, the trade-off here in terms of full coaching continuity is we have a new quarterback. It couldn't be absolute continuity, and I don't know too many folks now that McCarthy is on this team that still miss Kirk Cousins or wish that maybe you do, and that's fine. I enjoyed Kirk Cousins' performance for 6 seasons, but I thought it was time to move on. I expressly said so throughout the beginning of the offseason. There's the full coaching staff continuity, but there is a new QB1, whether it's Sam Darnold in September or JJ McCarthy. So it isn't the absolute entire thing, all the leaders plus QB1. The trade-off is evidently if you're going to have O'Connell, Phillips, and Flores, well, it's time to get a new quarterback, and in no time, hopefully that'll be J.J. McCarthy under center. Number 2, this was my favorite one the day that it happened. It remains one of my favorite signings. Andrew Van Ginkel to the Vikings, 2 years, $20 million, $21 million. That is a really reasonable price for a starting caliber edge rusher. The Miami Dolphins succumbed to a lot of injuries last year at outside linebacker. I think that's what they call it. I can't remember if they call them defensive ends down there. I think they play the 3-4 at outside linebacker. And Van Ginkel from Iowa quietly played very well, and he was almost by attrition the last man standing. And so, boom, it was time for him to hit free agency. And his old coach, Brian Flores, works for these Vikings, and the relationship was made there. Now, at the time, the Van Ginkel signing was really sweet because Danielle Hunter was about to sign with the Houston Texans, and bada bing, the Vikings found Jonathan Grenard from those same Texans, and by the way, went and signed Andrew Van Ginkel, about a 2 for the price of 1 for Danielle Hunter. Now, heading into the draft, because we were so quarterback focused, it felt like Grenard and Van Ginkel, okay, those will be the starting edge rushers, and then we'll see what they do with the depth. They still have Patrick Jones. They signed Jihad Ward. They would later get Gabriel Murphy. That probably would have done the trick for Flores' defense. But no, they also drafted Dallas Turner after an expensive trade with the Jacksonville Jaguars. So now, for the first time since about 2016, when Danielle Hunter was really starting to get good and, proved that he wouldn't have a sophomore slump, that he was the real deal. For the first time in 8 years, the Vikings have credible edge rusher depth. Usually, it's Danielle Hunter, Everson Griffin, and then a couple other guys that nobody expects much from. Or recently, Danielle Hunter, Zadarius Smith, and a couple other guys that aren't going to do much unless it's DJ Wanham playing against the Chicago Bears. Last year it was Danielle Hunter and Marcus Davenport. Well, Wanham decided that when Davenport disappeared, that Wanham would be pretty good against all opponents. This year, conveniently, when Danielle Hunter's not on the team anymore, they now have edge rusher depth. And it's actually going to be one of those spots when we get to July and August that we're like, ugh. Somebody's going to get cut, whether that is Patrick Jones, Jihad Ward, Andre Carter II. This is a very deep edge rusher room, mainly because Dallas Turner was drafted with the 17th overall pick. But it's wonderful to have Van Ginkel at 2 years and $20 million, which is not, too expensive if the guy plays a lot of snaps. It's kind of an affordable deal for a guy as productive as Van Ginkel. And for the first time in a very long time that, hey, if Grenard sprains an ankle, boom, you can play Van Ginkel and Dallas Turner, and we don't have to just, rely on some guy who's very clearly a backup edge rusher. So it's really fantastic that the Vikings were able to get deeper at edge rusher, and the reason that was feasible is because Van Ginkel got for 2 years and $20 million. It will remain one of my favorite free agent signings, assuming that he doesn't get hurt or something like Marcus Davenport. But I love having depth at that spot. It's probably the second most important position in football, unless you want to talk yourself into wide receiver as second most important. But Van Ginkel, he looks like a Viking with the long blonde hair. He is on this team at an affordable rate. That is number 2. Number 1. I've given this speech with a couple guests on the show, so forgive me if we have some duplication. In As a standalone event, when I saw Aaron Jones was signed by the Vikings, I kind of shrugged my shoulders and thought, all right, old running back, would we spend $6 million? That can work. I didn't go, oh my God, look what happened here. It was like, all right, we can do that. But while we've had about 2 months since that move, the reason that I like the Aaron Jones signing so much so that I put it at the top of the list for most underrated is it is bona fide evidence that the Vikings realize they have to fix the ground game. Whether or not Aaron Jones works and stays healthy, we shall see. But it's proof to me that they know we can't roll into a season with Ty Chandler and Dwayne McBride. We're not going to do it half-assed again. We're not going to go Alexander Mattison and Ty Chandler and then stubbornly cling to Alexander Mattison for 14 games or whatever it was. When you go sign an established veteran by Aaron Jones, albeit at the age of 29, you are putting your chips into the middle of the table to the tune of $6 million and saying, we know we have to fix this rushing attack because the rest of this offense is never going to be any good if we can't move the sticks on 3rd and 2. You might recall during the Adrian Peterson era and Dalvin Cook era, so about 16 years altogether, that when it was 3rd and 1, we'd be like, all gravy, baby, we got this. We got Adrian. Shouldn't be a problem. Last year, we'd be like, oh shit, it's 3rd and 1. Now what? And then you give it to Alexander Mattison, and then maybe he gets the first down. Maybe they end up punting. We shouldn't have to feel that way. We should be at least in the middle of the pack for rushing efficiency. And my speech is going to sound stale, but I'm going to do it again. This show is not calling for, hey, we need to return to the glory days of Vikings football where they ran the ball all the time. No, that's not going to happen. We don't endorse it. We know Kevin O'Connell is always going to want to throw it. But you have to be able to move the sticks when you have a lead, and usually that means rushing the football. For example, against the New Orleans Saints last year, the last semblance of anything good for the 2023 Vikings, the Vikings jumped out to a really sweet lead. Josh Dobbs was cooking. We were doing the Creed song, all that shit. And then the Saints damn near came back and won the game. That was because the Vikings could not rush the football and run out the clock. They couldn't move the sticks in the second half. They had a bunch of stupid punts, and that's because there was just generalized futility on the ground. Now, when you sign Aaron Jones and you hope that his injury prognosis is clear, it is right now, but hopefully it stays that way. You have a guy that has already been anointed RB1. We're not going to waltz into training camp and preseason thinking, ooh, who's going to be the RB1? Ty Chandler or Kene Nwangu? We're not going to have that discussion. We know it'll be Aaron Jones, probably with a healthy side dish of Chandler, and that's the way that it should be. For a team that ranked 27th in DVOA, rushing DVOA 2022. For a team that ranked 27th in rushing DVOA 2023. Zero improvement. You couldn't just roll with Ty Chandler and hope that he would replicate his performance against the Bengals and then I think it was the Lions. You had to either draft a running back like Jonathan Brooks or Trey Benson, sign one of the really expensive guys like Saquon, or meet in the damn middle with Aaron Jones, pay him $6 million. He's going to be 30 in December. You'll get a year or two from him, and then once and for all fix these rushing problems. I nominate that as the most underrated offseason move because it shows somebody there at TCO Performance Center has realized, I don't know if this J.J. McCarthy era will go well if we run the football like a bunch of imbeciles. So Aaron Jones is in the house. Hopefully it establishes a culture of being able to run the football when it's needed. And then with any luck, Ty Chandler is just as good as Aaron Jones. And, all we had was a bet hedge with Jones in the house. All right, number 5, starting to recap, is the continued hack that the Vikings have in undrafted free agency that's going to continue to pay dividends. Ivan Pace is a case study. Number 4 is adding cornerback depth in the way of a veteran, Shaquille Griffin. He makes it so we're not all apprehensive right now about which young cornerback is actually going to be any good. We know Shaq Griffin is decent. We know he can play. That makes this anxiety-free this summer about which cornerbacks might emerge as the guys at the top of the ticket. Number 3, maybe should have been higher on the list, is full coaching continuity. Kevin O'Connell, Wes Phillips, Brian Flores, they're back in their saddles. That hasn't happened for a Vikings coaching staff since 2015 into 2016. Number 2 is signing Andrew Van Ginkel for 2 years and $20 million. That's an affordable rate for a guy who can start. And the number 1 is somebody realizing that the Vikings will have to run the ball efficiently if this offense is ever going to reach its peak form. So doing that, you sign Aaron Jones to hopefully put an end to the malarkey of not being able to run the football. We will be back tomorrow talking with Josh Fry, and then we'll have a lot about the schedule release in this upcoming week. And that's all I got. Skol, baby.